Story 1. A big, burly former Marine and mercenary from Iraq was back stateside. He was a huge, fucking mountain of a man. We came face to face in a narrow office corridor where one of us was going to have to turn sideways. Neither of us turned, but we stopped. I am 6 feet 1 inch tall and weigh 260 pounds, and he still towered over me. He was a nice guy, but still a little conditioned, I guess, or mentally unhinged. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You feeling froggy?" Truly was like something out of a movie. Without blinking, I replied, "You better jump." We both cracked up and turned sideways while the office breathed a collective sigh of relief. Story 2. I am a 4th grade teacher. One day I was at the board and struggled to remember how to spell a word. I tried to make light of it by telling the students that sometimes adults need help with spelling, too. One student replied, "It is because you were poorly educated. But don't worry, we are too." Double whammy. Story 3. At work, project management undercut and mismanaged a project so badly that they rushed to release a minimum viable product with the intention of rolling out improvements later. After the product was released, they congratulated themselves and moved on. Then that minimum viable product broke. In a meeting with our directors about how broken it was and the cost to fix it, during which they claimed no cost was too large and unlimited manpower would be available, I asked, "How come we couldn't afford to do it right the first time, but we can afford to do it twice?" Story 4. I'll never forget the moment a family walked into the local pub where I was working. A big bald alpha patriarch type of dad and his wife and kids came in. I said, "Welcome. Where would you like to sit?" He snapped back, "Well, a table would be nice." Without missing a beat, I replied, "Actually, we usually sit on the chairs here." I'll never forget the satisfaction of that moment or the look on his face. Story 5. My uncles were complaining about my dad, so I walked into the conversation and told them it was not polite to talk about people behind their backs. My uncle turned to me and said I should not interrupt when the men are speaking. Completely out of character, I replied, "I do not see any men in here." Boy, did I get a lot of grief that day, but that is how I knew I won that exchange. Story 6. I worked in cell phone sales for a few years. A woman came in with a fairly new flip phone. This was 2018 and we still sold them. She complained because one side of the screen was dangling and said she had not done anything. It just snapped, and demanded a new phone. I told her that looked like physical damage and we did not have any coverage for that, since she had not purchased a phone protection warranty. She insisted it was not physical damage and that the phone had simply broken on its own. She started freaking out, calling me names, and swinging her phone in my face. Then the top half of the phone literally snapped off and landed on the counter in front of me. I looked her in the eyes and said, "Well, that was definitely physical damage." She lost her temper at my comment, and it was oddly satisfying. Story 7. Working retail, a Karen once told me she hoped I would die. I was so into work mode that I blankly responded, "I mean, we all die. That's not much of a threat." Maybe it was my blank stare, but that really shut her up. Story 8. I didn't realize the nature of my comment when I wrote it, but in high school one of my teachers did end-of-the-year anonymous evaluations. Everyone hated him, and I understood why, but I still did well in his class. I wrote, "I don't have any critiques about your teaching, but I think you should work on being a better person." Story 9. A forensic biology professor brings out a fresh human brain as a surprise to a stunned class. "You have no idea what I had to go through to get this," he said. "The skull?" someone asked. Story 10. When I was 12, my older sister had a boy over for Thanksgiving dinner. She dated lots of douches, but this guy took the cake. Big, brash, annoying dickhead who was rude to her and basically everyone. As we sat down for dinner, just before we were about to say what we were thankful for, he grunted something and said, "Huh, looks like I'm seated at the head of the table. Must be important." With a huge shit-eating grin. Without pausing, I gestured to my dad seated opposite him and said, "Actually, my dad is at the head of the table. You're the asshole." My mom scolded me for swearing at the table, but years later she told me she and my dad thought it was hilarious. Story 11. After 4 years in an abusive relationship and 1 year of an abusive marriage, I told my ex that I wanted a divorce. He told me that I could not divorce him or I would go to hell. My response was that I would see him there. I then kicked him out of my house. He had never paid a dime toward the bills, and I told him to call his mother for a plane ticket. Not the most badass story, but it felt good. Story 12. I was around 17 or 18 and getting my first filling at the dentist. They gave me nitrous oxide for pain and to help me relax during the procedure. The dentist came back and asked me, "How are you feeling?" All I said was, "I don't," and he lost his composure and began laughing for what seemed like 20 minutes before he could pull himself together. I also started laughing because of the laughing gas, and his laugh was infectious. We were both just sitting in the room laughing, and all his assistants came by and were very confused, laughing out loud. Story 13. Not me. My daughter. A boy at school called her retarded. Her response? "No, I'm autistic. I don't know what your fucking excuse is." She was in 6th grade. I was pretty shocked when I got that phone call. She usually doesn't say things to people. Story 14. I worked at Target in college in a stocking job where we had to be there between 4 and 5 in the morning to unload trucks. One morning I overslept a bit and walked to the unpacking line about 10 minutes late, eating a breakfast bar. The boss stormed over and loudly berated me in front of everyone for being late. As he went on, I listened and took bites of the bar without much expression, mainly because I was so tired. It finally bothered him that I was chewing while he was yelling. He stopped mid-sentence, held out his hand and said, "Give me that thing." It just happened that I only had one bite left. So I took it, handed him the wrapper, and said thanks with a mouth full of food. He paused and started laughing at my ridiculous response to his complaining. We were buddies after that. Story 15. A young man traveling with several other men was being searched by Border Patrol for suspected drug smuggling. A Border Patrol agent said he had the authority to perform a cavity search. I replied without missing a beat that he might have the authority, but neither of us would enjoy it and he would not find anything. I was off the hook and avoided a cavity search. Story 16. A couple of months ago, my now ex-friend told me all the things that were wrong with me. She finished by saying that at least she did not have to wear makeup to look pretty. I was fed up with her, so I replied that at least I was capable of looking pretty. She was speechless, and I felt like a badass because that was the first time I had ever stood up to her. Story 17. I am a writer and I do a bit of stand-up comedy. As a result, people introduce me to new people as a comedian and writer. One night, I was outside a bar smoking with a friend of a friend when he introduced me to one of his friends. His friend was dressed like Liam Gallagher from Oasis and had a cocky, sneering manner. The introduction went as follows. The friend said, "Mr. Gallagher, this is Righter of Wrongs. He is a comedian." Mr. Gallagher looked me up and down and said, "Comedian, eh? Does that mean you think you are funny?" I replied, "No, it means everyone else does." I literally do not know where it came from. I did not think about the response. It just came out. It is, hands down, the greatest thing I have ever said. Story 18. I was accused of being passive-aggressive, and I replied, "Which part sounded passive? I do not want to come across that way." Story 19. At a company meeting, someone presented a project they had volunteered to work on and finished. They then described things they thought they could improve in a self-deprecating way, and several people started railing into their work with petty criticism. It was good work, though, and a thought hit me, so I blurted it out. Sometimes done is the best. Feature. People laughed and the criticism stopped. They gave the person credit and we moved on. I was surprised the thought came out fully formed, as if I had been saying that phrase for decades. I realized how many people do not finish what they start. So done suddenly seemed like a very valuable feature. Give the person some credit for finishing the project. Story 20. Back in high school, I was a slow, fat kid. For physical education, we would jog about 1 kilometer to the beach, have a swimming lesson, then jog back. I was the last one back to the school grounds, and the teacher was standing at the gate. He told me that because I was too slow, he was going to lock the gate, and I would have to jog to the next one 200 meters away. I said that I would consider him locking me out of the school grounds to be a suspension and that I would just go home. He let me in straight away. I kind of wished he had tried calling my bluff so I could have followed through and just gone home. Story 21. I was in an acting class in college, and we were doing a scene where a couple was having a big, drawn-out fight. Multiple pairs went through the scene, and I studied it pretty hard, so I knew all the lines. We were about halfway through our performance when my partner clearly forgot her line. Because everyone was doing that scene, they could tell she had forgotten. Her next line was supposed to be, "Well, I'm sorry I asked." I'm not usually a quick thinker on my feet, but I filled the second or two of awkward silence with, "I bet you're sorry you asked, huh?" and continued with my lines. The class and professor loved it and laughed. It was probably the only quick-witted thing I've ever done in my life. Story 22. I already posted here, but I thought of another story. There was an extremely attractive girl in my Communication 101 class in college. One day, for a project that required us to interview other students, I was partnered with her. We did not finish our questions in class, so I asked if I could meet her later to finish the interview. She agreed. The next day, I met her after her dance group finished rehearsal. I went through the last few questions, and the final question I asked was, "What do you think the future holds?" She replied, "I do not even know what I am having for dinner tonight. I have no idea what the future holds." So I asked, "Well, if you do not know what you are having for dinner, would you like to have dinner with me?" She laughed and said yes. Although we only hooked up that night, I still look back on that day as one of my best dating stories. Story 23. I worked at a bookstore. A customer asked me, "How often do the periodicals come out?" I deadpanned, "Periodically," and he asked to speak to my manager. It was worth it. Story 24. It was a proud moment for me. I was always shy at school, had very few friends, and was frequently bullied. My mother died when I was 14, and I kept it to myself because I did not want sympathy or more bullying. Someone found out. I do not know how. In one of our shared classes, she said I should just die like my stupid mother did. The whole class was shocked. Even the teacher looked like a deer in headlights. I immediately stood to leave. Before I did, I turned to her, moved close, and said, "I've seen what cancer does to people. It hurts, and I would never wish that on anyone, not even you." Then I walked out. A lot of people gave me respect because I stood up for myself, although people then knew my mother had died, which was not great. I ended up leaving the school a few months later, but I was glad I had stood up for myself. Story 25. My girlfriend and I were discussing her returning to school. She kept putting it off every semester. One day, when I pushed her to actually go back, not just talk about it, she yelled, "Rome wasn't built in a day." I replied, "Yes, but it was built." A decade later, I still think of that. She did return to school and earned her master's degree. She is married now and has twins. I feel like a real asshole. Story 26. At a party a few years ago, someone stole my friend's purse. Her boyfriend found the men who took it and got it back for her, but he was still in an angry, drunken rage and continued to escalate the situation even though he was outnumbered. My friend found me and said, "I'm afraid he's about to get into a fight. I need your help. Stop him, please." I stood up and said, "I can't promise I can stop him from fighting, but I can promise I won't let him lose." Then I walked off to find him. Ultimately, no fight broke out. I didn't realize I had basically said a cheesy one-liner until afterwards, when my friend told me how intense it sounded. I didn't mean for it to be so dramatic. I just wanted to let her know I wouldn't let him get his ass kicked. I didn't mean to make it sound like I was about to demolish 3 men by myself like some sort of action hero. Story 27. I don't know about badass, but years ago I worked at a Hard Rock cafe, and we often had pre-shift server meetings on the patio. While my boss was droning on about us selling more overpriced plastic cups, I was staring at the spinning globe on top of the building that said, "Save the planet." I interrupted my boss by blurting out, "If Hard Rock is trying to save the planet, why do we waste so much paper?" The comment was aimed at my managers who had a habit of printing out memos. They didn't realize it was about them and passed the comment up the chain, which resulted in the company switching to a global paperless payroll system. As a reward, I was given a pin shaped like a light bulb that said "Bright Idea" on it. Thanks, I guess. Story 28. Go wait with mommy. Daddy might be going back to jail again. A man pushed my 5-year-old daughter at the fish store, and she started crying. When he heard me say that, he ran out of the store. I have never been to jail before. Story 29. We had an overly dramatic neighbor who always claimed she was sick and dying. My mom came to see my kids while she was battling stage 4 lung cancer. The neighbor pulled her aside and said, "Hi, Rita. So glad to see you. Did Jason tell you that I am dying?" My mom looked right at her, smiled, and said, "Me too, dear, but not today." I was never more proud of her. Story 30. This one had a little setup, but I think it's funny enough to share. During a family vacation, my grandmother gave me grief for not remembering her birthday. She said her birthday was the password to her iPhone because she wanted me to take a picture with it. While she was distracted, I opened the settings, changed the password to my birthday, and set the phone down. About 15 minutes later, she was trying to get into her phone and it was not working. Suspecting mischief, she grumpily asked me in front of the whole family if I had changed the password. I admitted that I had. "What is it?" she asked impatiently. "It's my birthday." She sat in stunned silence for about 15 seconds, unable to remember my birthday, before our family exploded with laughter. It was a good time. Story 31. A friend of mine was giving me shit while we were all bowling. Off the cuff I yelled, "You're adopted. Your parents don't even like you." He laughed because, friends. 3 hours later it hit me. I turned around and said, "Holy shit. I'm so sorry. I completely forgot you're adopted." He thought that made the whole situation even funnier. Story 32. When I was in high school, I joined the show choir band as the electric guitar player. I was a shy kid, so being surrounded by the show choir crowd was an adjustment. I stayed mostly quiet at rehearsals and just showed up and did my part. During one competition, we had just received the daytime round results and were told we had scored only a few points short of first place. As our director read the judges' feedback, he mentioned "Great band, but need more guitar." One of the singers turned to me and said, "You should rip a solo in the finals." I politely dismissed it, assuming the director would never go for it. But other singers soon chimed in. I decided to give it a try and told the team I was willing to play a solo. There was an awkward silence. To break it, I said, "The judges said they want more guitar. I think I can provide that." The room erupted. We went out fired up and performed our best show of the year. I played the solo during a dance break near the end and received a big roar from the crowd. Devastatingly, we placed second and felt robbed. But the guitar solo became a mainstay of our show after that. Story 33. I was eating McDonald's with a few friends, and I started choking. The only thing I managed to say in the whole ordeal was "I am McChokin." Story 34. A long time ago, I was walking down a side street in a medium-sized town with my girlfriend. A car was parked ahead with the front facing us as we approached. I saw 2 kids, maybe in their late teens, and I could instantly tell they were likely going to say something because my girlfriend was rather attractive. As soon as we came up next to them, I heard, "Hey baby, ditch the zero and come hang with the hero." I felt my blood boil, but I kept my cool and said calmly, "Sorry, buddy. I'm not gay, and don't call my girlfriend a zero." His friend started laughing. My girlfriend made a sarcastic crying face, and we both laughed. Story 35. When I was 7, some girls were bullying me at school. I had just learned the word mutual. One of the bullies said they did not like me, and I said the feeling was mutual, then walked off. I am 37 now, and I still remember it. Story 36. This was partly accidental. I was doing a university project and had to give a large presentation in front of about 50 to 60 other students about a possible business manufacturing and educational toy for children. It was a bit of a train wreck because no one else in the group had rehearsed or even read the script. As with all presentations, they asked for questions at the end, and I volunteered to answer them. One student at the back always asked awkward questions like, "What if someone were to injure themselves and sue you?" Or have you factored in matching employees' pensions? It was meant to be a fun project for first-year students. They weren't expecting a lot of detail. He opened right away asking awkward questions, but he misjudged how meticulous I am with details. I asked the lecturer hosting the session if I could load my spreadsheet, and he allowed it. That's when the student realized he had asked the wrong person. I had made an automated spreadsheet that calculated how many people were needed, how many machines, what hours people could work, rolling production over 24 hours, and overlapping shifts to ensure maximum efficiency. It also calculated costs and legal compliance, including pension contributions, taxes, holidays, time off due to illness, insurance, rent, and so on. I asked him every single thing he had overlooked legally, like time off work and pay increases. On the way out, the other groups smiled at me. It had shut him up. Story 37. I said nothing. I was on my motorcycle in traffic on a wet overpass with short jersey walls. The driver behind me was going a bit too fast and slammed on his brakes, sliding into me. There was no damage. He was going slow enough to touch and push me about 5 feet before finally coming to a stop. The angle had me going straight forward, so I did not fall. If he had been much faster, I would have been thrown over the edge to my death. So I was not happy. I turned off the engine, got off the bike, and slowly walked over to the driver who hit me. He was only a few feet. When he saw me coming, he furiously started raising his manual window, and I could see him struggling to crank it. When I got there, I knocked on his window, pointed at him, then turned and walked away. He looked terrified. I did not think about it until later. The guy you just hit, wearing a black helmet with a tinted visor, a black roadcrafter jacket and pants, thick metal-studded gloves, and black leather boots, knocks on your window and points at you for being a supreme dumbass. I had no idea. I just wanted to talk to him, be a bit angry, tell him I was okay, and take a second to check that my bike was okay too. Story 38. I tell an aggressive colleague that I have to repeat myself to my son 20 times a day too, but he is 3 years old. What is your excuse? Story 39. One morning at work, my chosen football team had thrashed my boss's chosen team. I gave him a load of shit about it, humorously of course. My boss is great. He gave me some back and told me to do a stock take of all items beginning with the letter C. I pointed at him and said 1. Luckily, he took it the right way and laughed a lot. Story 40. There's no way you're this much of an asshole naturally. You must go home and practice. I said this to a coworker who was throwing a fit and bullying a quieter coworker because he was pissed off. He had a habit of being a giant douche anytime things didn't go his way. The comment upset him so much he stormed into his office and stayed there for the rest of the day. Win for the rest of us. Story 41. This happened in my junior year of college. At the start of the semester, I introduced myself to my very intimidating biochemistry professor. He was a genius but also strict. Students were terrified to ask him questions because he was known for grilling people, and if they had not made enough effort beforehand, he would send them out of his office to learn on their own. As I walked in, he was sorting through some boxes and made a sarcastic remark about stuffing me in a box and shipping me off somewhere. He looked up for my response, and without thinking I blurted that I would not mind going somewhere nice. He laughed so hard it startled me. We got along well for the remainder of the semester. It is amazing what a little laughter can do to ease tension. Story 42. It wasn't something I said, but something I did. I'm a teacher, and one of my students kept tossing a small toy up and down during my lesson, which distracted her classmates who were gathered on the carpet. After giving her a few reminders, I wasn't even thinking and snatched the toy out of the air while continuing to teach. The class reacted loudly, and I felt pretty proud. I returned the toy to her later that day. I love that student. Story 43. One time I popped the blood vessels in my eye and had blood dripping down my face. Some kid said, "Hey man, you're bleeding." And I responded, "Shit, could have fooled me." Then I made it worse by touching my face, seeing the blood, and immediately saying, "Ah, I guess you were right." Story 44. Not badass. To be honest, their comeback was better. However, the exchange tickled me. So I am in a university sociology lecture. I am decidedly working class, from the Black Country, a generally more working class area of the West Midlands in England, and I am in the lecture as part of my social work degree. Two girls behind me are completing a sociology degree, have much posher Southern accents, and are clearly a bit better off than I am. The lecture is about class. I pronounced it class, and they pronounced it CLRs. Annoyed by their constant chatting, I turned around and said, "There is no fucking R in class." Without missing a beat, one of the girls shot back, "Yes, but there is a G in fucking." Edit. I am female and they were female. This was well over a decade ago. No cheesy or vulgar chat-up lines were involved. Story 45. Long story short, my friend would share my sexual escapades with other people, which I would rather he did not. I got fed up and ended up blurting out, "Just because you don't have your own stories to share doesn't mean you have to share mine." Story 46. In middle school, I had a class simply called reading class that was taught by a conservative Christian woman. I was reading Jurassic Park. The teacher asked to see my book, and I complied like a good student. The next day, she gave it back and said, "You can no longer read this book in this class because they use God's name in vain." I looked her square in the eye and replied, "Wouldn't you cuss if dinosaurs were chasing you?" Story 47. About 25 years ago, I was in grade 9 and my parents bought me a pair of Air Max. I am female, but I had picked a pair of Air Max that were supposed to be for males because I preferred the color of the shoes. I was very excited to get those shoes. We did not have much money and it was a pretty extravagant purchase. I was at our local shopping center and I ran into a group of guys I went to high school with. They were a real bunch of arseholes who thrived on putting other people down. One of the guys was wearing the same pair of shoes and said to me, "Do you know you were wearing men's shoes?" I quickly replied, "Then why the fuck are you wearing them?" The other guys laughed so hard, and it still stands out in my mind after all these years. Story 48. I said respect should be earned, not given, to an older woman at an extended family gathering. She was making mean comments about homeless people where she lived, and I told her she was being inconsiderate. Then she told me to respect her and not contradict her. Story 49. I was the lawyer in a criminal case arising out of the Standing Rock events. That morning, some Lakota people gave us a traditional blessing to wish us well for the trial, and 5 to 7 activists sat in the courtroom to watch and support us. I needed a certain digital document before the jury returned from a break, and we did not know when the break would end. I turned to the supporters holding a thumb drive and told them exactly what I needed from the office across the street and how to get it. I held out the thumb drive and, with all the intensity of an ancient general sending troops into battle, said, "Fastest runner, go now." A young woman grabbed the thumb drive and sprinted. She returned before the jury. Story 50. At the university, we had to present our senior projects in front of the whole department. I was nervous and thought everyone else had more interesting projects. The memorable moment came when my name was misprinted on the schedule and I was introduced on stage under the wrong name. I pointed to my real name on the presentation slide and said that is how my real name is spelled. It is just pronounced oddly. Many people laughed, and a few commended me for adding humor to the driest 3 hours of the year. Story 51. An older woman had road rage against me. Long story short, I pulled into a parallel parking space in front of the police station, and she rear-ended me at 30 miles per hour. But she was not done. She backed out, drove up the street, turned around, and then hit me head-on, screeching the entire time. The police officers came out in time to see her hit me a second time. I got out all shaky, wide-eyed, and scattered. A police officer helped me get up onto the curb while another pulled the woman out of her vehicle. She was screaming about young people being bad drivers and calling me a disrespectful millennial. I replied, "Madam, I may be a millennial, but at least I will not be in jail for child endangerment, you musty bag of skin." She did not realize my 4-year-old was in the car. The officer burst out laughing as she continued to shriek about my language. I went for more insults, calling her a slimy cumsock and a cobwebbed old fuckball, whatever I could think of. The officer admonished me but was still chuckling. I was pretty sure this woman looked purple with anger. I went to her court date. She lost her license permanently, already having 10 points, had to complete 80 hours of anger management, 120 hours of community service, and was credited with 3 days in jail. She was 84 years old. Story 52. At work, during a heated discussion about why things kept going wrong at a small company, upper management said something like, "Why does this keep happening? It is idiot-proof." I replied, "We need to stop hiring new idiots to test whether that is true." Edit. Replies seem split about 50-50 on what I meant, so I will address a few points instead of replying individually. The context was, please stop trying to find people to test whether something is idiot-proof. Hire someone who is not a bigger idiot than the previous hire who was let go for being incompetent. First, I work at a very small company and we are close enough outside of work that this would not get me fired or reprimanded. Second, my point was that we should hire smarter people instead of any Joe who applied, and then the procedure would be truly idiot-proof. We just needed a slightly smarter person. Third, the Douglas Adams quote is what I had in mind when I said it, but I could not remember at the time where I had heard it. Thanks to those who reminded me. Story 53. I was working in information technology for a company when Network Solutions had a massive domain name system outage. My manager, the general manager of the company and smart but not an information technology professional, asked me what was wrong besides the domain name system on the host side. I explained that the domain name system acts like a phone book, looking up our web address and directing it to the correct place, and that the phone book was on fire. Story 54. I had surgery, and when I woke up the nurse was very cute, so I started flirting with her with no success. I had a second surgery, and when I woke up it was the same nurse. My first words to her were, "How many surgeries do I need before I get your phone number? We have been married 8 years now." Story 55. I met my gay roommate's dad for the first time, and he asked me, "Are you keeping him straight?" I replied, "No, I am keeping him out of trouble though." Story 56. After waking up from a concussion that left blood still dripping down my head for an hour afterward, I muttered, "Fuck me, I'm going to be late," and then proceeded to take a history final exam. Story 57. The first day camping at a 2016 music festival, I headed off with a 4-gallon jug to get water. A girl in our group who I had never met asked if I needed help. I answered no, but I'd sure love some company. We are getting married this fall. Story 58. I was the nerdy, 5-foot-tall shy girl, and was constantly paired with struggling or misbehaving kids to help them. On this occasion, it was 2 popular guys in English class. One was a typical early 2000s comic book jock. The other was a class clown who did not know when to stop. Together, they unanimously agreed to do nothing, making fun of our classmates, while I made the world's ugliest word cloud. I failed art class, so that is no joke. I guess I had an epiphany because for the first time in my 15 years, I decided screw this and went to tell the teacher they were being lazy and that I would rather do it solo. It took a moment before the jokester realized I had even left, and when he pointed it out, the jock stood up looking ready to hulk out of his lowriders. The jock said, "What are you tattling on us for? It is not like we have done anything." I replied, "Yeah, that is kind of the point." I walked out of the dead silent class. I was so used to being bullied that I fully expected him to throw a chair at me, but apparently I just looked like a badass, which is accidental street cred my nerdy self was 100% eager to accept. Story 59. I was pretty young, maybe 7 or 8, and we were helping dig trenches to install sprinklers at the sports complex our community uses. My dad left me to dig a line, showed me how to do it, how wide it needed to be, and how deep he wanted it, so I started digging. I was minding my own business when a woman walking by with a stroller, what people today would call a Karen, said, "Little boy, you need to put that shovel down." I was infuriated because even at that age I knew she was wrong to tell me that. I said, "Bitch, please," and kept digging. Her jaw hit the cement and she went to talk to my dad, who was another 100 yards away. He told her the same thing. He never got mad at me for swearing. Story 60. Note: among gamers, to farm means to do something repeatedly to reach a set goal. For instance, farming gold means doing a certain activity over and over until you have gathered enough gold. I was playing 5 versus 5 League of Legends with 9 friends. When one of my teammates gave me some flack for not farming enough gold for minions, I replied, "I farm players." By sheer luck, I then proceeded to kill the entire enemy team on my own and won the game. The 5 enemy players joined my team's voice channel, and all 9 people were ecstatic about what had just happened, especially after my 4 teammates told the other 5 about my comment. I peaked at that moment. Story 61. In my country, there was a song that went, "Are you horny or do you want a cookie?" A man used this as a pickup line. My answer was, "I was horny, but after seeing your face, give me the cookie." Story 62. A mate was really drunk and was jokingly hitting our mate's potted plant during a party. He asked, "Do you come here often?" I quipped, "Bitch, olive here." It was, in fact, an olive tree. Story 63. When I was a broke college student, a wealthy older lawyer hit my car. There was no damage to his, but mine was crumpled, and I spent all of my money at the time keeping it on the road. I was going literally 7 miles per hour in a parking lot, and he was entirely at fault. We exchanged insurance information, and I had to get a rental car until mine was fixed. He dodged the insurance calls for about 2 weeks, forcing me to pay out of pocket for the rental about $600, which I did not have. I knew this guy was an arrogant, snooty lawyer. My father is a court attorney, and while I had never used that connection, I finally asked my father to call him and speak to him as a lawyer. 15 minutes later, I received a call and the insurance claim moved forward. Fast forward about 8 years. I was bartending at a swanky lounge during a Chamber of Commerce event where local business people were networking. This lawyer was feeling himself and charming the room. He ordered a glass of wine from me and then stopped and asked, "Hey, miss, do I know you?" I replied loudly, "Not really, but you hit my car in a parking lot a few years ago when I was a broke college student and left me with the bill. Do you want to open a tab for the wine or close out now?" He did not open a tab. Bonus story. Around 2005, I went to see a band and 30 Seconds to Mars was opening. Jared Leto was in that band, and at the time Lindsay Lohan was dating him. I live not far from where she grew up. A few days earlier, a friend told me that Lindsay Lohan had acted extremely entitled toward her while they were walking their dogs, refusing autographs no one had requested. We got to the front during their set so we could be in place for the next band. They were terrible. Lindsay was standing right behind the barrier watching the set. I motioned to her and asked if she would take a photo. She started yelling, "Oh my God, I'm a normal person trying to watch my boyfriend. Leave me alone." Exactly the reaction I wanted. I put on my most innocent, confused face and said I just wanted a picture with my boyfriend since we were in the front row, and then added, "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were someone famous." She went backstage after that. I honestly had never felt so cool. Shit gold? I have to learn what that means now. I cannot wait to tell my boss at that job that my attitude eventually earned me something. Story 64. It was art class when I was about 12 or 13. We were painting and I was sitting next to my friend. We were bored, so we dipped our hands into the paint for no reason. I happened to dip my hand in red. After 2 minutes, the teacher came by and said, "What on earth are you two doing?" I looked at my friend, who was about to burst out laughing, then back at the teacher and said, "Well, I guess you caught me red-handed." My friend could not hold himself together and laughed loudly. The art teacher was speechless for about 10 seconds, looking at the mess I had made. She then told us to wash our hands. Postscript. I literally meant to say, "You caught me red-handed." I did not realize why it was funny until I saw that the paint on my hand was red a few seconds later. Story 65. About a year ago, my cousin was going to fight a former friend in the parking lot of Sibylla, a fast food chain in Sweden, because the friend had said something about my cousin's girlfriend at the time. Nothing had happened, and I was impatient. I wanted it to be over. By sheer coincidence, an ambulance drove up to the drive-thru at about 1 a.m. I was probably the only one to notice. When I pointed at it and said, "Are you guys going to fight or not? This might be the best time to do so," they both looked at it and laughed. Unfortunately, they are no longer friends because what the former friend said ruined the relationship. No fight happened, which I think is good. Story 66. I used the son of a bitch line on my mom during an argument. "Mom, you little son of a bitch." Me, "Yes, I am." Mom was surprised. We both burst out laughing. Story 67. I was working in a job when the head manager from out of state came in for a visit. It was a quiet work day, so everyone was trying to look busy when he walked in. He asked how our day was going, and I replied, "Ah, just trying to look busy." He did not say much and walked out of the room. My peers looked at me as if to ask what I had said that for. I was face-palming and wanted to hide under a rock. Edit. The whole office was made redundant about a year later, which I found ironic. Story 68. I came out to my friend as a lesbian. She told me it was unnatural, so I said, "It's more natural than your breasts. We're not friends anymore." Story 69. My dad has the absolute worst habit of speaking his mind and uses it as an excuse for just being a cunt. He knows his children have been sexually assaulted or raped and would never stoop so low as to make fun of us for it or blame us, so I guess he has that going for him. That does not excuse the comments he makes about other people. There was a news report about a woman who was raped, and the conversation turned to whether certain types of clothing can be asking for it. In that moment, I said that me wearing my nightgown, ready for bed when I was 5 years old, was asking for it. He soon shut up. Story 70. Dude I worked with had a stutter and was a bit of an asshole. One day he said, "Hey Jack Wrangler, do you think you're going straight to hell because you're gay?" My response was, "Hey Anthony, do you think God gave you a stutter so you would think twice about what you say to people?" The whole workstation stopped. Silence followed. Story 71. I was in a discussion with my parents in which they were clearly wrong and missing the point. They began yelling because they did not have any arguments and started insisting on the respect I owe them as their son, saying I was disrespectful for contradicting them. I answered that I could not learn respect because I had not seen them show respect to me or to anyone, and they went completely silent. Story 72. I was crazy about this man. He was intelligent, attractive, funny, and a bit older. After a few weeks of dating, he said he was not ready for a commitment. I told him to come pick up his book from my place and not to reach out again because it hurt too much. I was that into him. He came to my apartment. I went to hand him the book and began to close the door. He put his foot in the way to stop it and said, "I do not know what to do. I am not ready, but I cannot stop thinking about you." I moved my hand off the door, handed him the book anyway, and said, "Then pick me up at 7. Now we are married." Edit. I did not expect this to blow up. Thanks for all of the awards. My husband's response, "That is a lot of upvotes." Story 73. When I was about 6, I overheard my mom and older sister talking about factories making pollution. From the way they spoke, I thought pollution was a manufactured chemical product like chlorine or silica. A few weeks later, a large local industrial company came to our school to talk about itself. A company representative listed things they made, like soap and bleach, and asked if anyone knew what else they produced. I raised my hand and said, "Pollution." The man laughed, embarrassed, and replied, "Well, we try not to." Story 74. When I was a kid under 10, my dad's best friend announced he was getting married to his girlfriend. It would be his third marriage. I asked if I was invited, and he said, "No, honey, it was adults only." I replied that it was okay and that I would just come to the next one. I had no idea what I was implying. I just knew this guy got married a lot. He did divorce his third wife, but last I heard they were dating again. Story 75. I never got along with my mom's older brother, Kyle. She also has 2 other brothers, Jake and Steve. When I was about 10 or 11, we were at my grandpa's house hanging out. Kyle showed up and immediately came into the bedroom to tease me. He started trying to roughly tickle and poke me, yelling, "Aren't you going to come say hi to your favorite uncle?" I somehow managed to reply innocently, "Oh, is Uncle Jake here?" He still hasn't forgiven me. I laughed. Story 76. During a slightly heated meeting, I asked a gunnery sergeant if he wanted to take the conversation outside. He was the government manager of a Department of Defense software project. He had quit smoking and I had not, so whenever I went out to smoke, he would ask to borrow a cigarette. What I meant to say was that I was asking if he wanted to continue the conversation outside while I enjoyed a cigarette that I was happy to share. Story 77. Maybe only legal professionals will get this. but I was arguing a motion to dismiss in a simple, typical case we handle frequently in that area of law. In a motion to dismiss, the only information that matters is what is mentioned in the complaint, the document that begins a lawsuit and lays out the case. Opposing counsel started using random facts from the file, the voluminous background documents we share about the case, in his argument. The judge asked me if those facts were true. I answered that I did not know because I had not looked at the file before the hearing. It was a motion to dismiss hearing and only the words in the complaint mattered, and I held up the 3-page complaint. I admitted I had not studied the case, but it did not matter because those facts are not allowed at a motion to dismiss hearing. It was bold and I was nervous, but I won the hearing. Afterward, the other lawyer was fuming and approached me to insist he was right. He accused me of manipulating the judge and said the judge seemed like the kind of man who was whipped by his wife. I kept smiling and thought it was ridiculous how poor a loser he was. A prominent attorney who had been waiting for his own hearing came up, high-fived me, and complimented my argument. The other lawyer was crestfallen. I could not stop smiling the whole day. Story 78. In a class at university, each student had to give a presentation about a scientific paper and answer questions about it. We were told to ask the speaker questions because otherwise the professor would, and his questions would obviously be harder. That professor was really brutal in his critiques of the presentations, but also fair and accurate. I asked a question after every presentation, but when my turn came, no one wanted to ask anything, so the professor asked me whether I wanted to ask myself a question. Without even thinking, I said, "Say, how come your presentation was so extremely excellent?" I was mentally preparing to be chewed out. Instead, the professor took a minute to stop laughing and then gave me the best grade possible. Later, I received some online points. Thank you, stranger. Story 79. I worked as a bartender at what was arguably the busiest bar in Boston around 2015. On a typically overwhelming Saturday, I was working the service bar. It was humming, making and distributing craft cocktails at breakneck speed for servers, while also taking orders from raving customers who seemed impossible to satisfy. It was a blur of crushed ice and fruit. I squeezed syrups and juices and topped drinks with myriad garnishes. I was in the zone, achieving godlike levels of drink making. While doing so, I tried to take a young woman's order. She said, "Excuse me, you owe my friend a drink." I asked, "Why?" She replied, "Because you got my friend wet." It was a residual splash, another innocent victim of the war on drink tickets. Without skipping a beat, I said, "Yeah, her and every girl who's ever been in here." I turned away and carried on with my work. To this day, I have not experienced that level of overwhelming self-satisfaction. She didn't respond. She knew she had been owned. My only regret is that nobody witnessed what is quite possibly the crowning achievement of my life. To anyone who thinks this is sad, I wish I could give you that feeling so you could understand what I felt, because you are fucking missing out. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.